Good morning. Happy Monday. We're here for part 10 today. This will be the last in my series, and then tomorrow we'll kind of close out with something else. All right, so let's dive right in. Part 10 is the cost of losing advocacy. Before I was a patient, I was a nurse. Advocacy was not an optional skill. It was not an extra task. It was not something we did when time allowed. It was the foundation of what we did. It was the instinct to notice what others missed, to question what didn't sit right, to slow things down when something felt wrong, to stand between uncertainty and harm. And like many who work in healthcare, I assumed that someone somewhere was always doing that work, that someone was connecting the dots, that someone was holding the full picture. Illness changed that assumption. There comes a point when some patients can no longer carry the full burden of advocacy alone. Symptoms overlap. Fatigue deepens. Appointments multiply. Information becomes fragmented across places, people, and systems. And what once felt manageable becomes something that requires more energy than the body can give. Advocacy in that space cannot be carried alone. It has to be shared. And when it is not, the experience of care begins to change in quiet ways. A detail not fully followed up. A concern mentioned but not revisited. A shift in condition that is observed but not fully connected. A decline that becomes familiar enough that it no longer triggers urgency. From the outside, each of those moments can appear small. From the inside, they accumulate. There is a particular kind of isolation that comes from being visibly unwell while not fully feeling seen. When the body changes in other ways, or in ways others can recognize, weight loss, fatigue, skin changes, weakness, hair loss, visible illness, and yet life around you continues without matching that urgency. When you begin to wonder whether what feels severe to you is being understood the same way by others, when you no longer have the strength to continuously re-explain what is happening and not enough energy to keep pushing for that clarity. Advocacy in those moments is not abstract. It becomes dependence. And when it is absent, the impact is not only medical, it is deeply human. But advocacy does not only belong in hospitals. It also exists in homes, in families, in friendships, in marriages, and in communities. Sometimes advocacy is not speaking for someone, but simply staying close enough to understand them. Serious illness can change the way a person communicates. Pain can interrupt thought. Exhaustion can take away words. Neurological conditions, anxiety, trauma, and depression can all make expression less precise than intention. And when communication becomes difficult, something important happens in relationships. Not always intentionally, and not always with harm in mind. But sometimes the meaning behind what is being said becomes harder to recognize. Words are heard, but not always understood. Intent is lost in translation, and assumptions begin to fill the gaps where understanding has not been fully sought. And the risk is not only that a person will go unheard, it is that they will be misunderstood. And misunderstanding carries its own cost. And there is another loss that is rarely spoken about. Sometimes the loss of advocacy begins long before a person stops speaking. Sometimes it begins when speaking no longer feels safe, when attempts to explain are repeatedly misunderstood, when concerns are reframed as complaints, and efforts to ask for help are received as criticism, when communication feels increasingly fragile and easily misread. Over time, some people grow quieter, and not because there is less to say, but because the effort required to be understood begins to outweigh the strength available to keep trying. And in that silence, something begins to shift inward. Self-doubt grows where clarity used to be. Anxiety replaces confidence. Depression deepens in the space where expression used to live freely. And not because the truth has changed, but because the experience of being misunderstood becomes heavy enough to reshape how that person sees themselves. For those living with serious illness, being understood is not a luxury. It is a form of care. The cost of losing advocacy, then, is not only found in systems, it is found in relationships, in communication, in the quiet places where a person is trying to be understood and finding that the message is not landing as intended. And in the distance that can grow, even among those who care, there is a human in there. And sometimes that is the part that gets lost. This is just a nurse writing from a patient's chair, and we'll see you again tomorrow. Thank you for listening.